The stadium lights shut off one by one until the pool turns into a black mirror. The crowd is gone. The bleachers are empty metal ribs cooling in the night air. Chlorinated water laps at thick acrylic walls and catches the last crumbs of light from a maintenance hallway. A woman in a wetsuit sits alone at the edge of the main tank, feet in the water, hair damp, shoulders tired. Below her, a shadow the size of a car slides past in slow, deliberate loops. She is not performing. The orca is not performing. There is no music, no applause, no choreography. Just a trainer on the edge and a predator, captive and massive, circling in a space too small for everything she remembers. The orca rises without warning until the white of her chin breaks the surface inches from the trainer's knees. One dark eye, glossy as oil, fixes on the woman's face and does not move. The woman exhales, rubs the smooth skin once, then twice, like someone checking that a heart is still beating. In a few minutes, something will go wrong. Alarms will flash. Radios will crackle. People will run. The woman will disappear into the pool, and it will look, for one long, sick moment, like the orca is dragging her down. What actually happens next will be argued about in safety reports, online comment threads, and hushed conversations at kitchen tables for years. But this much is true. The orca refuses to leave her trainer's side. Refuses in a way that goes against every expectation about what a captive apex predator might do when blood hits the water. Keep watching, because this is not a fairy tale about a friendly whale. This is a real story about memory, danger, and a loyalty nobody planned for. If intense animal stories and real human stakes are your thing, subscribe now and stay with me to the end. This one bends in directions you won't see coming. The park is nowhere extraordinary on a map. A marine entertainment complex built in the late 80s on the edge of a U.S. coastal city, far from wild orca routes. Concrete tanks dressed with painted rockwork. A stadium with 30 rows of blue seats. A holding pool behind the scenes that no tourist ever photographs on purpose. A plaque at the entrance talks about education, conservation, connection. The smell at the gates is sunscreen, popcorn, and salt that has never seen the open ocean. Her name is Elise Harper, 34, former college swimmer, degree in marine biology that could have gone another direction. Instead, she took the job that paid just enough and felt, at first, like a dream. She would be in the water with the animals she had loved since she was a kid. She would build bridges between species, according to the park brochure. The risk forms she signed were dense with legal phrases she was too excited to interrogate. The orca's name on the park schedule is Nova. In the back-of-house logs, she is 4F01, female, fourth in the facility's history, first born here. She arrived as a slick, shivering calf, lifted from a mother who bled heavily afterwards, and never quite trusted the gates again. Nova was bottle-fed under fluorescent lights, her world bounded by concrete and the shapes of humans leaning over railings. Her first sounds were not the low calls of a pod in the open sea. Her first sounds were compressors, pumps, and footsteps. By the time Elise joined the team, Nova was full-grown, 22 feet from rostrum to fluke. Over 8,000 pounds of muscle, bone, and ancestral hunting software pressed into patterns of tricks and routines. She could breach on cue, splash the front row with a violent joy she had been taught counted as fun, and hold a slide-out pose on the slide platform while people clapped. Elise met her on a training morning with no guests in the stands. The head trainer, a man whose skin looked permanently sunburned, talked about criteria and reinforcement schedules, behaviors, chains, bridging stimulus, fish buckets, hand signals. He did not talk about the history of accidents in facilities like this one. He did not mention that the same power in Nova's tail that could launch her into an elegant aerial could also break a human spine. What he did say stuck with Elise anyway. She is fast. She is smart. She is not your friend. The bond built itself around those three statements. Slow at first, then suddenly obvious. Morning after morning, Elise stood at the edge of the pool, whistle on a lanyard, bucket at her side, and asked Nova to work. Target bump, roll, open mouth, present tail, reinforce. Repeat. She learned the rhythm of the orca's breath, the particular way her left pectoral fin edged higher when she was about to refuse a cue. She learned the look that meant play and the look that meant not today. Somewhere in the second year, the relationship became something else. Elise still tracked approximations and jackpots, but she also noticed the way Nova's attention followed her even off session. On maintenance days, when other trainers ran the show, Nova's eye would stray toward the gate where Elise stood. On sick days, Elise would see video later and flinch at the sight of Nova circling slow, as if waiting for a familiar shape that didn't appear. This is where people tell themselves a story. The story goes like this. The orca loves the trainer. The trainer loves the orca. That story sells tickets. It also keeps everyone from looking too closely at the edges of the truth. Nova responded to Elise because Elise was consistent. She was fair with reinforcement. She did not overreach. She ended sessions before frustration turned into something worse. In a tank where the world is small and choices are few, predictability feels like safety. Nova mapped every gesture, every flinch, every breath. That mapping looked from the outside like affection. There was another history underneath all of this. It lives in incident reports no guest ever reads. Moments when a whale went off cue and pinned a trainer against acrylic, held them under for one heartbeat. Too long dragged them by a foot or an arm or a ponytail in what the later write-ups called misdirected play. Moments where the line between play and assault blurred in chlorinated water while spectators screamed. In some parks, in some years, the line broke completely and someone died. Elise knew those stories. You cannot work in that world and not know. She read the reports in trade publications, watched the grainy cell phone footage late at night, and promised herself that she would never put herself in a position where Nova had to choose between the world she had been trained into and the instincts that ran under it. That promise would turn out to be a lie told with the best intentions. The day everything shifted started like any other peak season Saturday. The sky was a hard, bright blue. The stadium filled with families and tourists. Kids in plastic ponchos packed the soak zone. The speakers cycled through an upbeat playlist, while a warm-up host asked who was ready to get wet. Out beyond the parking lot, the real ocean moved as it always did, unaware of the choreography unfolding inland. Elise had the closing segment that day, the trust sequence, a series of waterwork behaviors designed to show how close the human-animal bond could be. High-speed tandem swims, stand-on nose pushes. A final moment where the trainer floated still in the center of the pool, and the orca circled in a slow halo, passing close enough that black skin brushed bare arm. Protocols had changed in the industry. After a series of tragedies at other parks, federal guidelines and internal memos had tightened the rules. No more waterwork with certain whales. No more standing on rostrums. No more deep dives with large males known to have a history of unpredictability. But Nova's record was clean. No major incidents. No red flags. The park's own safety committee had signed off on the modified routine. Depths limited. Spotters in position. Emergency recall drills practiced weekly. Elise stepped onto the slide platform and felt the familiar rush, the strange mix of fear and focus that comes right before you commit your soft body to the same space as something that could end you in a second. She blew the whistle. Noah slid out, held a pose, then dropped back into the water with barely a splash. The sequence began. For 12 minutes, everything went right. Cues crisp, responses immediate. The crowd roared as Nova drove Elise across the surface, a black and white torpedo beneath her feet. Water sheets fanned out on either side. At the final pass, Elise signaled the transition into the slower closing behavior, the circle around the floating trainer. Nova complied, gliding into the deeper center of the pool. Elise floated on her back, arms out, eyes on the empty afternoon sky now framed by stadium architecture. The speakers dimmed, the host's voice lowered. This was the quiet moment, the trust moment. Then a noise tore through the calm from somewhere behind the scenes. A sharp metallic crack, followed by the grinding stagger of machinery failing. One of the back-of-house pumps, overworked and under-maintained, blew a gasket. The sudden change in water flow slapped a turbulence line against the main tank's wall. Nova startled, not badly, not violently, just a quick, hard flinch, the kind any animal makes when the environment shifts suddenly. Her flank brushed Elise more forcefully than usual. Elise's head snapped sideways. Her shoulder collided with a submerged ledge near the center viewing window, a feature she had been around 1,000 times without ever touching. Pain hit with a white clarity that stole breath. Her vision narrowed at the edges. The world tilted. The next breath did not come. From the stands, what people saw was simple. The trainer went limp. The Orca's broad head lifted, then pushed under her. For a terrifying second, bodies on land could not tell whether Nova was helping or pulling her down. Beneath the surface, inside water thick with light and noise, a different calculus unfolded. Elise's torso sagged, limbs lost structure. Her face turned toward the water instead of the air. Her heart did something strange in her chest. Later, doctors would talk about concussion, about a brief cardiac arrhythmia triggered by shock and impact. In the moment, all that existed was non-movement where there had always been movement. Nova had never seen Elise like this. She had seen her hold still for behaviors. She had seen her float as part of rehearsed trust. But there had always been a signal in the muscles, a tension, a set of micro-movements the whale's sonar could read from inches away. Now there was slack. Now there was something wrong in the electric field of muscle and bone she had mapped so carefully. She did the one thing her training and instincts agreed on. She got under the body. Her rostrum slid beneath Elise's back and lifted. The limp form rolled toward the surface instead of the bottom. Water parted. Elise's face broke the air. Her chest did not move. Nova adjusted, bringing her closer to the edge, where, in every past session, safety had always waited in the form of other humans leaning in with hands, ropes, voices. Nothing came immediately this time. For 3 or 4 long seconds, everyone in the stadium froze in the unnatural silence that falls when a crowd realizes something is wrong but has not yet decided whether to panic. Nova's movements changed. Trainers recognized it later in grainy playback. The subtle increase in the speed of her shallow breaths, the way she held her fluke stiff to maintain position instead of using easy corrections. She was working to keep the weight where it needed to be. She knew where the barrier between air and water sat. She knew the angle at which a human body floated easiest. She knew, in the way an animal knows without language, that leaving would mean that body would sink. Spotters broke their freeze. The emergency whistle blew, shrill and useless against the bigger sound inside everyone's chest. Rescue staff sprinted to stations. A supervisor yelled for the emergency platform. Hydraulics stuttered to life as the stage that could lift half the main tank's contents began to rise. Nova felt the floor change under her. The zone of buoyancy shrank as concrete moved upward. She adjusted again, refusing to slip away from the edge of the platform, even when her instinct to move away from vertical structures kicked in. Trainers shouted recall cues behind the scenes. She ignored them. For the first time in years, she blew off a signal that would normally earn a timeout, a withheld fish, a note in her chart. She did not move because the thing she could not categorize as lifeless or alive was still on her face. The stage rose. Water shallowed. Human hands reached. Nova held position until the last possible second, until fingers closed around fabric and flesh, and the body lifted just enough that gravity claimed it. Only then did she sink back, retreating a few feet, still hovering, still watching. On the concrete, medics worked. Compressions, breaths, a defibrillator paddle pressed to wet skin. Behind plexiglass, a stadium of people watched a scene normally hidden from them by walls and the polite distance of emergency response. Children cried. Parents tried and failed to find the right words. Someone filmed. Someone else told them to stop. Many forgot to breathe until Elise's chest did again. Her heart restarted. Her lungs took over. Consciousness lagged behind like a tide. She coughed, choked, rolled to her side. A medic spoke to her while another stabilized her neck. The stretcher arrived with a strange, rehearsed haste of people who have trained for this and prayed they would never do it for real. In the pool, Nova paced the width of the stage. She surfaced each time the stretcher wheels squeaked, rostrum lifting high, eye locked on the woman's shape. As they rolled Elise away, Nova followed along the wall as far as the main tank allowed. At the gate to the holding pool, when staff opened the steel barrier and tried to shift her into another space, she stalled and refused. No bridge sound, no fish, no pressure from other whales could move her. She knew, in whatever way an orca knows, that her trainer was not yet gone. In the days that followed, the official story hardened. A freak accident, a pump failure, a minor concussion, a miraculous survival. The park's PR team pitched it as a testament to their training, to their safety protocols, to the special bond between trainer and whale. Interviews were booked. Morning shows called. A media narrative, hungry and simple, took shape. On the other side of that simplicity, less comfortable questions waited. Why had a critical pump been left to run past the recommended maintenance interval? Why had the trust sequence, with any in-water component, been allowed to continue at all after the incidents that had already cost lives in other parks? Why had the emergency platform taken as long as it did to raise? Why had the Orca, conditioned to follow recall signals, ignored them? Internal investigations began. External agencies opened files. Lawyers sharpened pens. Activists outside the park gates held signs with messages that cut straight at the soft spots in the park's story. It was only a matter of time, they argued, before an accident that ended differently. They did not dismiss Nova's behavior. They refused to let it be used as a smokescreen. Meanwhile, Elise lay in a hospital bed that smelled faintly of antiseptic and old air. Her head throbbed. Her shoulder screamed. The left side of her chest ached in a way that hinted at bruised ribs and deeper, invisible damage. Nurses came and went in quiet shifts. Doctors talked about rest and cognitive monitoring and return to work timelines as if that was a foregone conclusion. Whenever she closed her eyes, water filled the inside of her skull. Not the staged, choreographed water she knew, but a heavy, invasive weight. She felt again the moment her breath stopped. She felt, can flashbulb fragments, the bulk of Nova under her, the pressure of rostrum against her back, the sensation of being held up when everything in her body wanted to drop. On the second night, the head trainer came. His smile was tight. His eyes looked wrong. He told her the company was grateful. She was okay. He told her that safety protocols had worked as designed. He told her the media requests were piling up. He did not ask how she dreamed. He did not mention that Nova had refused to leave the main tank for almost 12 hours after the incident, shadowing every human who approached the edge, scanning every platform, only settling when the stadium lights finally went black. Later, when she was discharged and cleared to return in a limited capacity, Elise asked to see the footage. Not the edited version the park used in its internal debrief. The raw angles, every second from every camera. In the windowless room where management watched shows and trainers watched themselves, she sat with headphones on and watched herself disappear again and again. Every angle told the same near disaster. The impact, the limpness, the lift, the way Nova's body changed shape around her. She watched the seconds where no one on land moved. She watched the precise adjustments, the tilt of dorsal, the grind of flukes, the micro-corrections that kept her face above water when any normal breach and submerge pattern would have let gravity do its work. She watched Nova ignore 3 separate recall cues and hold station until the first human hand touched her wetsuit. She watched the gate to the holding pool slide open later, after the crowd had been ushered out and the safety drills had been run for real. She watched Nova linger by the main stage lip, turning circles, only going through the gate once she had scanned the empty deck 3 times. It looked, in the shaky clarity of night vision, like hesitation, like searching, like refusal worn down by the absence of the one person she associated with that edge. The longer she watched, the less the word miracle fit and the more another word crowded in: choice. Animals in captivity live in a world stripped of choices. What to eat, when to swim, where to rest, who to share space with, everything is managed, scheduled, reinforced. Within that narrow corridor, they still find pockets of agency, small rebellions, subtle edits. The decision to stall a behavior for an extra second, to splash this person and not that one, to hold an object just out of reach until the game shifts. What Nova did that day went beyond a stalled behavior. It was an insistence, a refusal to comply with the built system because the system did not address the situation that had unfolded. Here was a human who was not doing the thing humans were supposed to do in the water. No signal, no movement. Something was wrong. The recall whistle meant leave. Her experience meant stay. She chose experience. The park used her choice as a marketing hook. They tried to claim it as proof of how much their whales loved their trainers. Elise knew better. She also knew worse. Nova's refusal to leave her side built on a library of moments that had nothing to do with affection and everything to do with attention. Years of shared space, countless hours in dead time between shows, the way Elise's gait sounded on the catwalk, the way her heartbeat changed under neoprene when she was sick or scared or angry at something else and trying not to show it. An orca's world is sound and electricity. Nova had mapped her. The days after the accident made one other thing clear. Nova was not adjusting back into routine. She balked at certain cues now. Anything that required her to swim under a human body made her hesitate. She refused a belly-up present near the center window where Elise had hit her head. She hovered more frequently under the spots where trainers usually entered the water, surfacing sharply when anyone leaned in too far, as if ready to push them up if they lost balance. From a distance, from the stands, it looked like heightened engagement. From a few feet away, it looked like hypervigilance. In logs, some trainers called it guarding behavior. Others used a different word: stress. The company's behaviorists held meetings about it. Opinions split. Some argued that Nova should be removed from water work entirely. Others suggested reshaping the trust routine to capitalize on the public's interest in the hero whale. The calculus was familiar: risk versus reward, liability versus spectacle. The animal's mental state sat at the center of the discussion without truly taking up space. For Elise, the question had already shifted. It no longer lived in the binary of in water or dry work. It lived in a harder place. Should Nova be here at all? She'd always known, in the abstract, that wild orcas travel tens of miles a day, that their social structures are intricate, their diets specialized, their dialects distinct from pod to pod. She'd read the studies. She'd given the talking points before shows. But something about being held above water by a whale that had never seen open ocean cracked theory into something else. She had felt the raw weight of compressed life in the pressure of that rostrum under her spine. Months passed. The park reopened the trust sequence without trainers in the water. Nova performed modified routines. She complied mostly. Behind the scenes, Elise worked reduced hours, cleared by doctors but still dogged by headaches and flashes of vertigo. She requested more time poolside and less time in shows. Management, half wary of a lawsuit, half hungry for the ratings a comeback could bring, granted what they framed as a reintegrative schedule. In the quiet of early mornings, before gates opened and before anyone asked for a splash, she sat again at the edge of the main tank. No wetsuit now. Just jeans, a hoodie, ankles damp where the Orca's exhale misted the concrete. Nova still came when she saw her, still surfaced directly below her feet, still watched with an intensity that felt like a hand resting against the sternum. Elise talked then, not in cues or commands, but in the pointless words people use to fill silence. Apologies, thanks, confessions, about how scared she had been, how strange it felt to have lived when the metrics said she might not have. The Orca did not understand the words. She understood the breath, the tension, the way the sound moved through bone and water. She stayed. She refused to leave the spot as long as Elise sat there. Once, maintenance needed to drain the main tank to inspect a seam that had started to seep. The plan required moving Nova into the medical pool for 12 hours. Simple, routine. The gates opened. The other whales moved through. Nova did not. Trainers cued. She stalled. They tried again. She lined up, then veered away at the last second to surface under Elise's usual edge. It took an extra 40 minutes and every trick in the training manual to move her that day. When the gates finally shut and pumps began to cycle water out, Elise stood in the empty stadium and watched the main basin sink. The void it left behind whispered something she could not unhear. The next week, she handed in a letter. Not a resignation, though part of her wanted that. A statement, a demand, a line that could not be walked back. She wanted Nova out. Not to another park, not to another concrete tank with a different logo. To a seaside sanctuary one of the project's activists and researchers had been trying to fund for years. A netted-off bay with deeper water, with natural currents, with the possibility, however slight, of a different kind of life. The answer from management was as swift as it was predictable. Impossible. Too expensive. Too risky. The animal's welfare was best served, they said, by the familiar environment she knew. Transport stress would be dangerous. Vet assessments did not indicate any current physical suffering. They floated the idea of giving Nova more choice within the existing system. More enrichment. More variability. Choice, Elise thought, staring at the form-letter language from a team that had watched the whale refuse to leave her side and opted to turn that into a commercial. She did not quit. Not right away. Instead, she became a problem on the inside. She asked questions in meetings that made people shift in their seats. She insisted on equipment inspections and backed them with the memory of the pump failure that had nearly killed her. She documented every balk, every sign of stereotypic behavior, every fixation. She shared transcripts and clips with outside biologists, willing to risk their access by speaking bluntly. And the story of the Orca, who refused to leave her trainer's side, grew a second edge. Not just a tale of a miraculous instinct. A case study in what happens when intelligence and confinement collide. In another timeline, maybe the park would have leaned in. Maybe they would have helped build the sanctuary and written themselves into history as the place that began to undo the captivity era. In this one, they doubled down. PR campaigns, partnerships with soft news shows, carefully edited documentaries about our special family. But the footage was out there. Not the staged edits. The raw angles. The way Nova held a limp human against the surface for precious seconds that stretched into something like a verdict on everyone watching. People kept finding those clips, sharing them, talking about them. Not everyone reached the same conclusion. Some doubled down on the narrative that captivity fosters an unbreakable bond. Others saw the opposite, a desperate act from an animal forced into a role that never should have existed in the first place. Somewhere between those extremes sat the truth. An orca, in a compromised environment, making a choice that saved a life at the edge of a system that might one day take another. Years from now, when the park has changed names or closed or reinvented itself as something less concrete and more virtual, the story will still circulate. The woman who nearly died and lived because the whale would not let her sink. The whale who obeyed recall cues, except the one that would have meant watching a familiar shape fall away into green water. You can frame it as loyalty if you want, as love, as a miracle. The reality is colder and more powerful. It is about attention, about pattern recognition honed by deprivation, about what happens when an animal built for complex decision-making is forced to make them in a box we made. Either way, the image stays. A dark eye at the surface of an artificial sea. A human body slack on the rise of a predator's face. A refusal to move, even when every signal says, leave. What do we do with that? If you are near the ocean, you do the small things. You keep your distance from the wild pods that still hunt on tides that do not know your name. You do not chase them for a better shot. You advocate for the removal of the concrete tanks built to swap open horizons for painted walls. You support the sanctuaries that would give animals like Nova a different ending. If you are far inland, you still have a role. You learn where your electricity comes from and what rivers it changed. You learn which companies profit from putting charismatic megafauna in tiny rooms. You decide, quietly and powerfully, not to fund those rooms. You teach your kids that seeing a wild thing on its terms, at a distance, is worth more than touching it in a place designed to sell the illusion of connection. You remember that a creature who could have taken a life instead held it above water for long enough that other humans could do their work. You remember that we built the conditions where that choice had to be made at all. The ocean does not ask us for gratitude. It does not demand apologies. It does not care if we tell this story right or wrong. It will continue with or without us. Its inhabitants will continue to make decisions inside the systems we impose on them until those systems break. The only real question is whether we learn from what they show us. A whale refused to leave her trainer's side, and in doing so exposed the thin line between care and control, between spectacle and survival, between the story we like to tell about ourselves and the one the water actually holds. If this story stayed with you, if you felt the cold of that tank, the weight of that choice, the press of that rostrum under someone else's spine, subscribe and hit the bell. Like the video, so this kind of caution reaches people who still think captivity is harmless fun. Share it with the person who loves whales and the one who has never thought about them twice. Then, when you meet the sea in your own life, remember what you heard here. Keep your distance. Use your voice. Spend your attention like it matters. The next time an animal has to decide whether to hold us up or let us fall, let the world we built for it be kinder than this. The pressure inside the park built slowly, like water behind a dam designed in another century. Elise became the reference point, whether she wanted it or not. New hires were shown the clip of Nova, holding her up as both warning and inspiration. This is why we train the way we do, supervisors said over the hum of the projector. This is why you always trust the whales and yourself. The message sounded noble. It felt wrong. She stood in the back of those sessions sometimes and watched their faces. Some smiled with a kind of awe. Some flinched. One or two looked down at their notebooks and wrote nothing. Nobody asked the question that hissed in the quiet corners of Elise's mind. What happens when a whale chooses differently? At home, away from salt and bleach and the repeating slogans of the park, Her body healed faster than her head. The bruise under her hairline faded to yellow and then disappeared. The ache in her chest eased. Her shoulder regained its range. But in the middle of the night, she would wake with her throat tight, heart pounding, certain she was falling through cold water toward a bottom she could not see. In the dark of her small apartment, the sound of the refrigerator kicking on became the shudder of Ma. She tried grounding tricks the therapist taught her. Name 5 things you can see. 4 you can touch. 3 you can hear. 2 you can smell. 1 you can taste. It worked mostly. But sometimes the first thing she saw was the outline of Nova's eye in her memory, and the exercise folded in on itself. On a gray Sunday, when the marine layer pressed low over the freeway, and the park as billboards looked damp and tired, Elise made a decision that would pull the story out beyond the walls of the stadium. She agreed to speak to a journalist who had been calling her for weeks. The reporter did not fit the stereotype. No aggressive questions. No tabloid edge. Just a man with a small recorder and a legal pad sitting across from her in a coffee shop that smelled like burnt beans and sugar. He had done his homework. He knew about the pump failure, the maintenance logs, the industry incidents. He knew about the clip of Nova refusing recall. He asked one question that sat in the middle of all the others like a weight. What did it feel like? Not what happened. Not who is to blame. What did it feel like when you realized it was the whale keeping you alive? She tried to answer honestly. She talked about the terror and the surreal clarity, about how close the water had sounded against her ears, about the ache in her spine where the rostrum had dug in, about the way time had stretched and then snapped. She did not say the rest out loud. The shame that came with knowing an animal trapped in a tank had done more for her in those seconds than some of the humans in charge of safety had. The article came out a month later. It wasn't a hit piece. It wasn't a puff profile. It was something rarer. A detailed, uneasy look at the incident that refused to resolve neatly. It praised Nova's behavior without romanticizing it. It pointed a quiet finger at maintenance records. It quoted Elise's description of that moment underwater and let it sit unadorned on the page. It also included one sentence that dug under the park's skin like a splinter. She believes the Orca made a deliberate choice to stay, even when her training told her to leave. That single line traveled farther than the rest. It was shared, screenshot, reposted. Some read it and scoffed. Animals do not make moral choices, they said. It was all conditioning. Others embraced it as evidence of a soul. The truth was less dramatic and more disturbing. Orcas make decisions based on history, pattern recognition, and risk. Underwater, in that instant, Nova decided that the pattern of Elise plus surface plus safety mattered more than the pattern of whistle plus gate plus recall. In the park, the fallout was immediate. Management called Elise into a meeting with HR and legal. The conference room was over-air conditioned and smelled faintly of carpet cleaner. They smiled too much. They used words like miscommunication and mischaracterization. She listened without reacting until the legal counsel, a man with perfect hair and a perfectly neutral tone, slid a paper across the table. It was a reminder of her non-disparagement clause. It was also, in its own way, a test. She read it. She set it down. She said quietly that nothing in the article was untrue. She did not accuse. She did not apologize. She simply refused to recant the one thing she knew in her bones. The meeting ended with strained politeness. She walked back past the locker rooms and the staff kitchen and the long hallway that led to the life support systems. The hum of pumps and filters beat the same steady rhythm as always. For the first time, she heard it not as background, but as the pulse of the machine the park had strapped over Nova's life. Back at the main pool, she found the Orca already there, even though the show schedule said she should have been in the back habitat. Nova surfaced as soon as Elise's shadow crossed the edge. It was like being recognized by a tide. She knelt, reached out, and pressed her palm to the smooth, rubbery skin between blowhole and rostrum. "No bucket, no whistle, no fish. I'm trying," she whispered, almost without sound. It didn't matter that the orca couldn't understand English. What mattered was that she stayed, refusing to leave that spot for as long as Elise stayed. In the months that followed, the pressure around Nova grew in two directions at once. Fans wrote letters praising the hero whale, sending drawings from children who colored her in with markers, adding hearts and stars and clumsy signatures. Activists amplified Elise's article and connected it to a longer chain of stories about captivity, accidents, and the mental health of large mammals kept as attractions. The park leaned hard into the positive version. They renamed one of the shows Nova, A Story of Trust. They cut together a montage of her most dramatic behaviors, closing with a slow-motion shot of the incident that had nearly killed Elise, framed carefully, so it looked less like a near-fatal accident and more like an active rescue. Over it, a voiceover talked about bonds and bravery. Behind the scenes, some trainers were thrilled. They loved the new narrative. It made their work feel like something heroic, too. Others felt the hair rise on their arms every time the promo played. They knew what had been cropped out. They knew how close the day had come to becoming another name on an industry list nobody likes to read. Elise straddled those two worlds until the split became impossible. One afternoon, during a rehearsal with no audience, another trainer misjudged a jump entry and slipped, not much. Just a half step off where he meant to go. His heels skidded on wet concrete. His body pitched forward toward the same center area where Elise had gone down months before. He caught himself in time. Hands slapped the deck. Knees scraped, no one fell in. But Nova reacted like he had. She surged upward, eyes wide, body turning in the water to get under the space where a person might have been. The trainer froze, half-crouched, watching a 2-ton animal pivot below him with an urgency that sent adrenaline punching through his veins. He laughed it off a second later, made a joke, shook it away in front of his colleagues. Later, in the locker room, his hands shook when he tried to tie his shoes. Nova had learned something. Humans slipped. Humans could vanish into water suddenly. When that happened, her job, in the world she had built from trauma and repetition, was to get under them before gravity and water did what gravity and water always do. That learning made her safer for humans in that small, twisted way. It also made her life narrower. Every misstep became a potential emergency in her mind. Every pause at the edge drew her attention. The park's behaviorists logged it as increased human body monitoring. They recommended parsing sessions so she would not burn out. They also noted the PR value of weaving it into the narrative. The whale who watches over her trainers. The animal who cares so much she checks on them constantly. Elise read the notes and felt sick. The more she watched Nova, the more she saw the cost. The circuits etched into those powerful muscles now had to accommodate not only tricks and diets and nightly light shows, but the constant possibility of collapse. The whale's world had become a tight loop between deep instinct and unnatural responsibility. The burden of being a symbol laid itself on a spine never meant to carry it. Human beings will do strange things for stories. They will ignore pain. They will justify risk. They will bend reality around the shape that looks best on a highlight reel. The danger is that they expect the animals in their orbit to do the same. So when the Sanctuary project resurfaced this time with serious backing, a bay identified, environmental impact reports drafted, Elise saw a narrow opening and threw herself at it. The plan came from a coalition: marine biologists, activists, a few former trainers from other facilities, a philanthropic foundation tired of writing checks to institutions that refused to change, They had found a cold, sheltered cove on the coast several states away, outside the migration path of wild pods, deep enough to allow diving, protected enough to keep storms from shredding the sea pens. They wanted a pioneer case, a high-profile whale whose story could both justify and test the model. Nova was at the top of their list. On paper, it made a strange kind of sense. She was not caught from the wild. She had never known anything but tanks. She was relatively young, still strong. She had a connection with a human advocate inside the facility. Her near-miss incident had already made her a symbol whether she liked it or not. Moving her would be expensive, logistically nightmarish, politically explosive, and possible. There was no legal path to force the park to give her up. There was, however, pressure. Public, financial, moral. The sanctuary group began a campaign. Elise, after long nights of sleepless wrestling with her contract and her conscience, agreed to speak on the record in support. The second wave of coverage was very different from the first. Headlines screamed more. Talk shows framed her as either a hero or a traitor. Some accused her of turning on the institution that had saved her life. Others praised her for putting the animals' welfare above nostalgia. Comment sections did what comment sections do: divided, inflamed, dehumanized. In the park, colleagues split too. Some avoided her in hallways. Others squeezed her shoulder in quiet solidarity when no managers were around. The head trainer, the one who had first told her Nova was not her friend, cornered her behind the med pool one evening. "You're going to get her killed," he hissed, eyes hot with a fury that had less to do with Nova, and more to do with what change would mean to his own sense of control. "Moves are dangerous. You know that." She did know. Transporting a whale is a high-risk operation. Sedation, slings, cranes, trucks, planes, boats. Every step a chance for disaster. But leaving her where she was carried its own risks, measured not just in near misses and pump failures, but in years of mental compression. "We already almost got me killed," she said. "Leaving her here doesn't make her safer. It just keeps her convenient." It was the first time she had said it out loud to anyone who could fire her. The legal battle that followed never made prime-time news. It was fought in conference rooms and via email, in regulatory filings and subtle threats. The sanctuary group offered to cover relocation costs. The park countered with claims about ownership and responsibility. Lawyers argued over liabilities, permits, veterinary assessments, logistics. While that human trench warfare played out, Nova kept circling her narrow world. She performed when cued, refused when overloaded, pressed herself to the acrylic when children held their hands up, thinking they could touch. She watched Elise whenever she entered the arena, pupils tightening slightly, echolocation clicks skittering through the water with a different tempo. All she knew was that something in the air had changed. Years earlier, before the accident, Elise might have taken comfort in the rhythms of her days. Now every repetition felt like a reminder of what had nearly broken her and what was still breaking Nova by degrees. She took to arriving early just to watch the sky above the tank before the noise began. Seagulls wheeled overhead. Real clouds moved in real wind. Beyond the concrete walls, the ocean's own tide breathed in and out, ignoring the fake surf pumped through hidden speakers during shows. One morning, as she leaned on the rail watching the surface ripple under an overcast sky, she heard a sound that almost never came from inside the park. Thunder. A storm rolled in from the coast faster than the forecast had predicted. The first show of the day was canceled. Guests grumbled and shuffled toward indoor exhibits. Trainers hustled to secure equipment, check moorings, adjust feeding schedules. High winds turned the flags at the top of the stadium into hard, snapping lines. Nova reacted differently. The pressure change, the low-frequency rumble under the wind, the sudden dimming of light, these were sensations closer to what her ancestors had known. She became more active, not less. She porpoised along the length of the tank, surfacing in tight bursts, breath coming harder, white patches flashing against the iron sky. Elise watched her and imagined, not for the first time, what it would be like to see that body in open water on a day like this. To see her cut through real waves instead of bouncing against reflected ones. To watch her choose a direction that did not dead end into concrete. The storm passed. The park reopened. Shows resumed. But that image hung in Elise's mind like an afterimage burned into the retina by a flash. When the decision finally came down about the sanctuary transfer, it did not arrive with fanfare. It came in the form of an email from legal with too many bullet points and not enough courage. The park had agreed, under specific conditions, to explore the possibility of moving Nova. It was not a yes. It was not a no. It was a bureaucratic maybe. The sanctuary team called it a breakthrough. Elise called it what it felt like. A narrow door, partially open, with time and caution pushing against it from both sides. Preparations began quietly. Behavioral desensitization to slings and stretchers. Medical workups. Incremental exposure to the kind of handling she would need to tolerate during transport. Trainers pretended it was a routine health initiative. Guests remained mostly unaware. But in the water, Nova responded the way any intelligent animal does when something big is coming, with heightened awareness and selective cooperation. She accepted some of the new touches easily. Others she resisted. Elise watched her carefully, insisting on slow progression. No rushing, no forcing. Trauma had already carved its print into both their nervous systems. They didn't need another. On the day they first brought the transport sling into the main arena, nerves hummed along every railing. The sling was massive, wide, strong, hung from a rig meant to lift thousands of pounds. It looked like a floating piece of industrial hardware dropped into a world that usually tried to hide the machinery behind themed rockwork. Nova eyed it from a distance, then approached in cautious increments, echolocating in small bursts, tracing its shape with sound. Trainers rewarded her for every inspection, every brave brush against its unfamiliar texture. After an hour, she slid partway in, then backed out. After 2, she rested in it fully for a few breaths, muscled bulk cradled by a fabric that smelled like new plastic in fear. Watching from the platform, Elise felt something shift in her chest. For the first time since the accident, dread was not the loudest voice inside. Another voice, quieter but more insistent, spoke up. This might work. It did not happen quickly. Months of preparation blended together. Meetings, inspections, permits. Contingency plans for every phase of the move. Weather windows short enough to make logistics a nightmare. Political pressure from other parks, terrified of a precedent that would make their own animals seem less like fixtures and more like hostages. Through it all, the core fact remained simple. A whale had once refused to leave her trainer's side. Now the trainer refused to leave the whale in a life that asked her to carry that reflex forever in a box. The morning of the move dawned calm, almost indecently so, as if the sky had decided to cooperate out of curiosity. Trucks idled in the backlot. A crane unfolded its arm with excruciating care. News helicopters circled at a distance, held back by airspace restrictions and the park's lawyers. Protesters and supporters both gathered outside the gates, signs held high, voices a low rumble against the wall. Inside, the stadium was nearly empty. Only essential staff and a few invited observers lined the rails. The water in the main tank had been dropped to a carefully calculated level. The sling hung in place waiting. Nova slid into it more easily than anyone had dared to hope. Not without hesitation. Not without a low, restless pattern to her movements. But she went, head cradled, fluke supported, dorsal fin catching the morning light as she rose slowly, impossibly, out of the water that had defined the boundaries of her existence. For a heartbeat, she hung there, suspended between two worlds. Below her, the tank gleamed blue and empty. Beyond her, through an open gate, the sky showed a thin strip of real ocean color in the distance. Elise stood where she had almost died, hands white-knuckled on the railing, and watched the animal that had held her up now held in turn by cold human engineering. The memory of the rostrum at her back and the memory of the sling around Nova's body braided together into something like justice and something like loss. The move did not kill her. It could have. Many things could have gone wrong. Sedation reactions, equipment failures, weather shifts, human error. All the old ghosts that haunt any operation involving huge bodies and fragile systems. They threaded that needle this time. Hours later, Nova slipped from sling to sea pen in a cove that smelled of real salt and kelp and silt. The first thing she did was nothing dramatic. No wild breach. No cinematic race toward the netted horizon. She hovered. She listened. The acoustic world here was a different language. Waves on rock. Distant boat engines not tuned to stadium schedules. The deep, constant hum of the open ocean beyond the mouth of the bay. Her first circuit of the pen was slow, cautious, precise. She touched the perimeter with her flanks like a blind person learning a room. The net flexed. Light shifted. Elise, watching from a floating dock with a life vest she hadn't wanted, but agreed to, felt her throat close up. Nova surfaced nearer, closer than any wild orca would ever choose to approach. Old patterns mixed with new possibilities. For the first time, when Elise reached out, the water under her hand moved with a life that did not rebound from concrete. The swell lifted and lowered them both in a rhythm no park could produce. In the months that followed, the world's attention drifted. Other stories rose, other crises erupted. The Sanctuary project lost its 15 minutes of intense focus and settled into the long, unglamorous work of monitoring, adjusting, learning. Nova adapted in fits and starts. She developed new swim patterns, longer dives. She began to respond not only to human cues, but to weather, to wild fish passing just beyond the nets, to the distant calls of wild whales moving along ancient routes. She could sense, but not join. Was she free? No, not in the narrow, pure sense the word deserves, but she was freer. Her world had expanded from a blue bowl into a living slice of sea. The box had grown. For a captive-born animal who might never be able to fend for herself in truly open water, it was the best compromise a flawed species could offer. Elise stayed with the project as long as her body and bank account allowed. She took a job with the Sanctuary team, and another with a research group documenting Nova's behavioral changes. She did fewer interviews. When asked about the day in the stadium, she told the story simply, without embellishment. Over time, what had once been the most vivid moment of her life settled into place among many others. Exhausting health checks, quiet afternoons with a notebook on it, rocking dock early mornings when fog turned the cove into a private universe. Nova never again had to choose between a recall whistle and a limp human body. She still surfaced under Elise sometimes, close enough that the old pattern flickered and then faded into something gentler. Not guarding, not performing, just presence. The world will keep telling the story in its preferred shape. Some will remember it as proof of the special bond between trainer and whale. Others will cite it as evidence that keeping apex predators in tanks is a moral failure no amount of affection can fix. Somewhere between those versions lies a set of harder truths. Intelligent animals will make decisions inside whatever systems we build around them. Sometimes those decisions will save us. Sometimes they will hurt us. The fact that they can do either is not an argument for caging them. It is a sign that we owe them more than a storyline. You can stand at the edge of a sanctuary pen now, if you travel to the right lonely cove, and feel the difference in your own body. The wind smells like rain and seaweed, not fries asphalt. The only applause comes from waves hitting the rock. An orca surfaces, breathes, and disappears without a soundtrack. No one narrates. No one asks her to tail walk. The silence feels strange at first. Then it feels correct. Somewhere under that water lives a memory of a day when blood hit a chlorinated pool and an animal refused to turn away. That memory is written into a nervous system that still understands how to hunt, how to navigate by sound, how to raise a calf if given the chance. It is also written into a human body that woke up on concrete instead of on a slab in a morgue. We like to think those memories belong to us because we can name them. They don't. They belong to the ocean, to the ledger it keeps on our actions, to the quiet, ongoing tally of when we chose profit over prudence, and when, occasionally, we chose better. If you held your breath through this story, if you saw that stadium, felt that water, watched that whale in your mind, don't let it end when the screen goes dark. Carry it into the choices you make, the tickets you buy, the politicians you support, the conversations you have when someone says, "What's the harm? They look so happy on TV." Remember that once, in a place built for spectacle, an orca refused to leave her trainer's side, and in doing so, forced everyone watching to confront the thin, uncomfortable line between love and control. Remember that she did not owe us that moment. We owed her a life where it was never necessary. If this story dug under your skin and stayed there, subscribe. There are more like it stories where animals and humans collide in ways that rewrite the script. Hit like so, this one travels farther than the park's old commercials ever did. Share it with someone who still thinks of whales as smiling mascots on billboards. And the next time you're near real water, any water, stop and listen. No music, no narration, just movement and breath. Remember her there, not in a tank, but as a reminder that we are always being watched by the things we think we own. The sea has a long memory. We should try to deserve the next decision it hands back to us. Maybe years from now, a kid will stumble across an old recording of that day in the stadium, grainy and low res, shot from the bleachers by someone whose hands were shaking. They will watch the tiny figure in black disappear and the black and white shape rise under her. They will see the chaos on the deck, the blur of medics, the flash of emergency lights. They will pause, rewind, squint. Then they will search for what happened after. They will find newer footage, a wide cove, a gray day, an orca surfacing in a space that looks more like a real home than any painted backdrop. They will put the two together in their mind and feel a question take root where older generations felt only wonder or guilt. Why was she there in the first place? That question matters more than any angle we can shoot or any headline we can write. It is the hinge between repeating our mistakes and finally walking away from them. If the story of the orca who refused to leave her trainer's side does anything lasting, let it be this. Let it make that question unavoidable. Because in the end, this ice and tea, just about one whale or one woman, or one almost tragedy redeemed by a freak alignment of instinct and circumstance. It's about us, about what kinds of beauty we insist on owning, and what kinds we are finally willing to just witness from a distance. Standing at the edge of that choice, you are more powerful than you think. Your money, your attention, your outrage, your restraint, they all feed into the systems that decide where the next generation of orcas spend their lives, behind glass, or beyond it. So if your heart sped up while you listened to this, if your stomach nodded when she slipped under the water and only unclenched when you knew she would live, don't waste that reaction. Turn it into something. A conversation, a boycott, a donation, a vote, or even just a quiet decision to never again buy a ticket that turns a predator into a prop. The ocean does not clap when we get it right. It does not boo when we get it wrong. It simply absorbs the result and moves on. We are the ones who have to live with the stories. Make this one count. Subscribe and like to support this channel.